Welcome to View from Afar, a podcast by the travel industry for the travel industry. I'm Aislinn Green, Associate Director of Podcasts at Afar, and in this episode, we're bringing you the latest from Seatrade Cruise Global, the annual Miami conference that brings together the best and brightest in the cruise industry. I sat down with Anne Kailash, the editor of Seatrade Cruise News, a global B2B website. She's covered the cruise industry for decades and even got her start as a shipboard editor sailing the world on a cruise ship. Anne, welcome to View from Afar. It's so nice to meet you in person. We're here at Seatrade, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. What has the mood been like?
It's been extremely enthusiastic considering the economic uncertainty and volatility, the backdrop. But there were at least 6 new ships ordered, which is a sign of confidence and optimism. And the sessions have been packed. There's been a very good vibe, I think, and lots of people here.
Well, you mentioned the kind of economic uncertainty, and during your keynote yesterday, you asked some questions around that, and many of the executives were taking a more wait-and-see approach. But what's your take on this as someone who has covered the industry for so many years?
I, of course, take their cue because they're the ones who are telling me what they're saying about the business. But I do feel that it is a moment of uncertainty, and the change in the U.S. administration, they haven't really made the contacts there yet, I think. They have a lot of people to get to know. And what's going to happen, the impact of the tariffs on the supply chain for the cruise ships, that's got to be a big concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is like they're saying, we'll wait and see. But in the meantime, business is booming. And one of the big areas of growth that I've read about is in the millennial market. So all signs point to them being the next big group. So I'm curious if you think that this group, that younger travelers are aging into cruising, or if the cruise industry has done a better job of marketing to a younger audience.
I think both, but definitely the cruise industry is doing a better job of marketing. And if you see the product on the ships, how it's changing, for example, special areas devoted to families with small children, Icon of the Seas, for example. So they're really creating a product for younger customers, I think, and getting the word out about that.
Even hearing things about moving away from kind of more formal dinner nights and toward food halls and these things that seem like they match what people in their 30s and 40s are looking for.
Exactly.
Well, one of the other things that has been really cool to see is this move towards cruise lines working more intimately with local communities and making sure that cruising is benefiting everyone in a positive way. Can you tell me more about what you've seen in terms of that kind of transition?
Well, for example, the whole private island and destination story, which is often perceived as the cruise line is developing a private place where they keep all the money to themselves. And in fact, at a place like Celebration Key, which is Carnival Cruise Line's big new development in Grand Bahama Island, they have a ton of jobs that are being created for local people. And they're using local vendors and artisans in many of the shops. So that's just one example where giving jobs to local people and stimulating the economy. I was sailing recently on a Ponant ship, an icebreaker, through Canada in the winter. It was the first Canadian winter cruise.
Yeah.
And in that situation, there were a lot of native communities living along the St. Lawrence, and I got to go and stay in an Innu community tent, which was sold as a shore excursion, get to know the local people, and that was a wonderful experience, hearing about their daily lives. So another sort of local outreach. Just at this conference, I heard about a region I didn't know of called the Great Bear Sea, which is the waterway along British Columbia leading up to Alaska that all the ships sail through, and they're interested in having more outreach to cruise ships to talk about their communities and culture and preservation and sustainability efforts with wildlife in the area.
That's so cool. And then the ball is more in their court, right? They're saying, hey, we want this kind of tourism. How could we partner to work together in a way that will celebrate our culture and benefit us in the way that we want it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the cruise lines are looking, they want, one of the big messages that has come through is more authenticity, more local things, more local sourcing, and sustainability. And all of these things play into Native communities, First Nations communities wanting to share their authentic culture, supply products, and also as their economies change. For example, the British Columbia area, logging and fishing may be going down, so communities need new economic resources, and the cruise industry could be something beneficial to both.
When did you start to notice that conversation change within the industry?
Some years ago, but it's really gotten more intense, I would say, in the last few years. Also, as you see more small cruise lines and expedition companies coming into the business, that's their whole thing, right? Destination, as opposed to the ship being the destination. It's the places where the ships are going that are important. And I think the culture's changed too. You mentioned millennials wanting more authentic experience.
Yeah. And maybe looking for things like sustainability and always environmental, social.
Absolutely.
That's a part of their decision making.
Absolutely. People are growing up with this expectation.
Yeah, right. It's an expectation. I mean, it's been really heartening to see that those have been, and I don't want to say buzzwords, but that's the conversation. And it seems very genuine and complex.
I think it is genuine. And lots of companies are making efforts, Virgin Voyages, an example, to source their products, be more sustainable. All the companies are doing that.
Well, speaking of destinations, it's always interesting to see, which destinations are emerging for cruises, have new ports, are popping up on travelers' radars. Are there any that you've seen in this space?
Actually, several pop into my head right now. So Bahamas, there's such a proliferation of private and exclusive destinations there. Why the Bahamas? Closest to the place where the main cruises sail from, Florida, right? So there's fuel savings, and it's a way to have short cruises to introduce more people into the business. So the Bahamas are really popular now because of all of the destinations and big ships. Then conversely, on the other side of the globe, Japan is having its moment. I think it's a very popular destination. Asia was the last travel market to recover and open up after the pandemic.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of demand to go there. And one of the companies I interviewed at this conference, Mitsui, bought 2 former Seabourn cruise ships.
Really?
They already have a couple of their vessels, but they're not only marketing to Japanese, but to North Americans who want to travel in Japan on an authentic Japanese experience.
That is so cool.
So that was interesting. It sounds like a fabulous experience. Yeah. And they've secured a famous Japanese chef who's trained in French. He has a sort of like interpretation of French food with Japanese ingredients. And they have a lot of traditional activities, for example, Japanese storytelling and ikebana and all kinds of cool and interesting things to do, and wonderful excursions. Another one, Greenland, which has been in the news a lot, has been attracting a lot of expedition ships in recent years.
You've covered this industry for many years. How have you seen it evolve?
Definitely a greater environmental and sustainability focus. Mm-hmm. The whole authenticity in destinations, creating products for new markets and more diverse range of people. So families with small children and people who like to be very active and people who like to relax and spas and gourmands. Cruising has always been about eating, but the ships have really the most spectacular dining you can imagine, Michelin star chefs and all kinds of wonderful innovations on the dining front. So
before we started, we were just chatting about why the stereotypes around cruising have been so stubborn. And why do you think that is? Because they're so far from being true anymore. Pick a stereotype and I feel like we could debunk it.
Yes. I don't know. Anna Nash, who's the new president of Explorer Journeys, a new brand started by MSC Cruises, but a small ship luxury brand, came from the hotel and resort sector. And she said, yes, that stereotype exists. And yet once people experience a cruise, they love it. It's got the highest guest satisfaction rating in all of travel, according to research. And cruise ships are very visible. And you see the stack with smoke coming out. I mean, sometimes that may just be steam exhaust. It's not necessarily pollution emissions, So they're visible, and there's a lack of understanding about everything that's being done behind the scenes, I think.
And maybe it's a harder story to tell. I mean, it's so complex.
It is a really complex business. Highly regulated, too. That's another misperception, that ships are sort of lawless and when in fact there are so many layers of regulatory controls for everything.
And as we were also discussing before we hit record, the cruise industry has made this commitment and they're required to be net zero by 2050. So where do you think we are at in this moment in time? I mean, Viking had some interesting news this week.
Yes. One of the big news points of the conference is that Viking announced it is having the first hydrogen fuel cells on a cruise ship, which is a great advance. That's a zero emission. Now, that doesn't power the ship the whole time. That's just for short stints when they're in places like the Norwegian fjords, zero emission requirement there, so they'll be able to comply. But it's a big step forward, and companies are looking at all different kinds of technologies and so forth. But it really comes down to the availability of fuels, and that's beyond the cruise industry's doing. That's a challenge for society, shipping, for airlines.
I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on Viking being the first one to go out to market with this. They seem to be willing to kind of take risks like this.
Yes. Well, Viking and its founder and owner, Torsten Hagen, pride themselves in being contrarian, right? So, no kids, no nickel and diming, all of these things. And I think that they're willing to think outside the box and try something different. And this is something where everybody will share the information. And Torsten Hagen said this is going to be open source, everything that they learn and do. And Fincantieri, the preeminent builder of all cruise ships in the industry, not the sole builder, but they build more than anyone else. Look at all their other clients. They're the ones who developed the fuel cell technology. And so, of course, they're going to all be sharing and looking at this. And maybe that's not the solution. Maybe it turns out to be methanol, or maybe it turns out to be something else, maybe a variety of solutions and fuels and technologies.
But how do we know until we try, right?
Exactly. That's one thing. I've covered this business for a long time. I learn something new every day. It's really fascinating, but I can't wait to report on the first emission-free cruise ship. That will be so exciting. I hope I get to do that.
And when do you think that might be, if you had a, crystal ball?
Well, there are some in development right now. Ponant has a project that would be emissions-free, involving sails and fuel cells and other technologies. Orient Express is building a vessel with new sails technology developed in France, and that's very interesting. So that'll be sail and LNG powered, that concept, but who knows?
You were recently featured on the Netflix show Everybody's Live with John Mulaney. So A, how did that come about? And B, what was it like? And was it as crazy as it seems?
It was totally crazy and really fun experience. My big night in Hollywood. I had a great time.
Yeah.
I was contacted by John Mulaney's producers through LinkedIn, of all things, and they were looking for someone, an expert in the cruise industry. And so they producers called and we talked for several hours, everything about the cruise industry. But I had no idea what I was getting into until I walked out on stage for this live show where I was the straight person and all the other guests were big celebrities having fun and commenting about this business.
Like Ben Stiller, Quinta Brunson, Nick Kroll,
That's
those
right.
were your partners.
Yeah.
So what was it like to be, I mean, I would be intimidated by being up against these like comedic minds, but also trying to represent my industry. So
Yes.
how did you walk that line?
I researched all of them because I wondered if they had any cruise experience.
Yes.
And I found out Ben Stiller's parents, the great comedians, Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira, had been on the Love Boat several times. And Quinta Brunson had actually taken a sailing course.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's not exactly cruising, but she's been out on the water. And Nick Kroll, I learned from the show, had been on a Galapagos cruise.
Do you think that you convinced Ben Stiller to go on a cruise?
I was hoping they would ask me what cruise I would recommend for each of them because I was thinking about that.
Well, since you didn't have the opportunity to do that in this show, can you tell us what you'd recommend for each of these celebrities?
Oh, gosh, sure. I had so much fun thinking about this. So John Mulaney is a new father. He's got 2 small children. And I thought I would put him on Icon of the Seas in the Ultimate Family Villa, this multi-story suite where, you know, he and his wife could be with their kids and the nanny and have a great time. But it's also private and exclusive.
Love it.
Quinta Brunson, who mentioned if she had a holiday, she'd like to pamper herself at the Four Seasons. I'd put her on the Four Seasons yacht for sure. She would love that.
Yes.
And probably in the Funnel Suite. That's the top multi-story suite. It's encased mostly in glass.
Wow.
And it's 4 stories high. It has a huge terrace and it has a wading pool, a dipping pool on the deck. So I think she would enjoy that privacy and pampering.
Absolutely. All right. And then we have Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller. So Ben Stiller, such a big star, and he could go anywhere, right? But I'd send him on an expedition to Antarctica because I think that would be something really unusual and fun and adventurous. And he could go on a very exclusive ship there and have privacy and comfort, but a big adventure. I think he would enjoy that a lot with his wife.
Yeah. Well, and last but not least, Nick Kroll, who went on the Galapagos cruise. Where would you send him?
Yes, I think I would send Nick on Carnival Cruise Line because he's a comedian and he does great impressions, and Carnival carries more guests than any other company and a great variety of people. So that would give him a lot of different folks to study, a lot of accents to work on. And also they have so many comedy clubs. So maybe he could do a sort of guest appearance one night and thrill everybody on board.
Or heckle the other comedians.
Exactly. Good point.
Well, cruise lines, listen up. I feel like this is a great opportunity to follow up on this show and get some celebrities out.
Exactly.
All right. Well, final question. Where are you cruising next?
I am so excited because right after the Sea Trade Conference, I'm not going home. I'm going to Norwegian Cruise Line's new ship, Norwegian Aqua. And I'm really excited because they have a production show dedicated to Prince, and I'm a big Prince fan. So I can't wait to go into their show. It's going to be like a theatrical concert where we can stand up and watch the show. But I think that's going to be really exciting.
And that's it for this episode of View from Afar. In the show notes, you'll find links to the cruise lines as well as to Afar's travel advisor newsletter. Join us next week for an interview with Maud Bailey, the CEO of Accor's Sofitel, Sofitel Legend, M Gallery, and Emblems brands. And you can find more Sea Trade content on our sister podcast, Unpacked. The link is in the show notes. Ready for more views from afar? Visit afar.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. We're at Afar Media. If you enjoyed today's exploration, I hope you'll come back for more great conversations. Follow the show to make sure you don't miss an episode, and be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other travel industry experts find it. This has been View from Afar, a production of Afar Media. The podcast is produced by Aislinn Green and Nikki Galteland. Music composition from Epidemic Sound.